Hey everybody, married man here, faced with a new challenge today. I've glued together several boards to make a top to a piece of furniture, but now I need to cut this to length. I want to have 45-degree angles along the edges, so I can't just line up a board with my circular saw. I was really hoping to do this on my table saw. Which brings me to my problem. My table saw fence only extends out to where I can cut up to 30 inches. I need to cut beyond that. So everybody, this is what I came up with. I'm gonna get a piece of MDF that's long enough. I'm gonna line it up with my left-hand side miter slot, so I'll have consistent measurements because everything aligns to the miter slot. I'll be able to put a board across the end at the right measurement to act as a fence. I'll bring that saw blade up through this board and hopefully we'll be able to secure this and get a good cut. I'm going to keep figuring this out. Let's take it step by step. I was thinking the best way to line this up against the miter slot is to put something straight in the miter slot, then push the board. This has some wiggle to it. So, got some shims, which were really cut-offs from when I was trimming down the other boards. But I'm going to use them to trim this if I can get them to fit. There. And that should give me a nice flat surface to line this up. Put a clamper right there. At this point, we turn on our saw and turn the handle, raising the blade up through the board. And because I won't be able to use my factory splitter with this jig, I took a couple of those shims that we had before and glued them together, and it became the exact thickness I need to make a homemade splitter to go in here. I'm going to put on just a little bit of super glue, get it put in. Oh yeah, that's a tight fit. It's got a nice pointed end over here. I'm just going to shape it a little bit. I want to avoid kickback if we can. I got to say, I've never put paste wax on MDF before. So everybody, I've got the board waxed. I put the stop at the measurement that I wanted. I knew that I wanted this first cut to be 41.5 inches, so that is 41.5 from the cut in the board here. But to make it easy, it's also 46 inches from the edge of the board, which is lined up with the miter slot. So I could line up this side of the board at 46 inches and this side of the board at 46 inches for my auxiliary fence, and I'm ready to go. So now I'll put on my safety goggles, turn this on, raise the blade. Matter of fact, I will go ahead and do that. Then we'll be ready to cut. I might power on to turn it up because of that splitter we put in. Unfortunately, the board was too long considering where I'd put the clamps to hold down the jig. So I had to cut off the end with a circular saw so that we could fit the board and make our cut. Now we should be able to use the table saw. At this point, unfortunately, I had some lost video footage. I really wish we'd had that because it shows a failure to be able to cut the piece. Whenever it made it past the saw blade, it became jammed on our makeshift splitter because the splitter was too thick. Here, I took a razor blade and trimmed that down to a slightly slimmer line so that the board could make a full cut and pass. After making the initial cut, I then reset the auxiliary fence to a shorter distance, turned the board, and made the next cut. Once again, I needed to cut off another 1.5 inches or so. So I made my measurements, moved the auxiliary fence with its clamps up to the right distance from the blade in preparation for the next cut. Now that our board is cut to the right length, I want to add a 45-degree chamfer to the top on the edge. So I'm going to need to turn my blade to 45 degrees. Before we do that, I need to get rid of our makeshift riving knife, and I believe I can do that by turning on the saw and raising it up all the way. Let's try that. Now I'll turn my saw to 45 degrees before I raise the saw up through the board. Our final cut measured out at 39 5/8. That's the length of our board. Now, with the blade at a 45-degree angle, the opening for the blade is moved over. So the length to the first part of the blade is now 40 1/4. The length to our miter slot was 44 1/8. We're going to reduce that length for this next cut to 43 1/4 to make up this gap between where the blade was, where the blade's cutting now, and give us a small chamfer. And then we'll evaluate if we need to chamfer more. And now I went back and changed the length from our miter slot to our makeshift fence down by 1/8 of an inch, because I want that chamfer to be a little bit more prominent. And we'll see how that turns out. Our old chamfer had a length of about 3/8. By moving the makeshift fence over by 1/8 of an inch, it has increased the chamfer to 5/8. So incremental changes make a big difference. And I like that much better. With a chamfer on each end of my board, it's now time to take this jig off, put everything up, get my table saw back to a regular setting to do a chamfer down the sides. After the initial cut, I went back and made small changes in the length to my cutting fence and then ran back over the board, sneaking up on an exact fit at the corners with the chamfers I had done on the other ends. Here again, making a slight adjustment, sneaking up on that perfect fit. And yet again, making another adjustment. A lot of woodworking seems to be troubleshooting as you go along to sneak up on certain fits with the wood. Now that I have my chamfer like I want it on one side, I can flip the board over and make the same cut on the other side, knowing that this should result in the proper chamfer on both sides of my boards. This results in nice chamfers that meet together on the corners. Then it's time for everyone's favorite phase of woodworking, and that is sanding. We gave the board a good sanding with some 180 and then 220 grit sandpaper. With the board sanded and cut to size, it's time to apply stain and polyurethane. But before that, my floor supervisor showed up to give me some comments.
Awesome. My favorite color is black and white.
Yeah, this is actually stain.
Stain?
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
So paint sits on the surface of the wood, and stain penetrates and changes the color of the fibers, but allows you to see the grain.
Can you keep it that color, please?
I gotta wipe it off after. I gotta wipe some of it off in a few minutes to get it like we want it.
What color is it gonna be?
It's gonna be. It's called ebony, but it's a stain. So some of the grain is gonna show through. With my supervisor satisfied with the answers I gave, I continued with the staining, wiping off, and polyurethane processes. This is detailed in a separate video. I'll put the link in the notes below. Okay, it's 24 hours later, and this is what the top looks like. Don't go anywhere yet. When I come back, I got some real talk. Thanks for hanging around till the end. Now that we're done, let's talk about what we did. We basically attached another surface onto the table saw, raised a blade through it, and set up a temporary fence to enable us to cut a longer distance than our table saw allows. My table saw is set up where the maximum cut is 30 inches. So whenever the fence is all the way out, it will cut 30 inches as it sits. What I did, I think, was okay, but I know there's a right way, the wrong way, and my way. So I'd really appreciate your feedback on how you would have accomplished these cuts. Looking back now, I really think that I could have set up a straight edge, used my circular saw, and accomplished the initial cut. Then, using my router with a chamfer router bit, accomplished the chamfers all the way around. That would have made them uniform, required a lot less testing and so forth. Another thing is I broke the cardinal rule about length versus width when making cuts on the table saw. The table saw fence is made to cut along the longer surface of a board. It's not made to use the fence whenever you're doing a cross cut. And the width of our board that we were cutting was longer than it was narrow, and so we were actually doing a cross cut using a makeshift fence. I know this is not the safest way to get it done. I really think using an alternate method would have probably worked better. But this is a lessons learned, and I love the way that everything turned out. And I'd like your comments below on how you would have done it, what you think I did wrong, and how you think it could be done better in the future. I like the idea of cutting with my circular saw and then using a router bit to add the chamfer. You may have a different idea, and I'd like to hear it. So please comment below. And give me that like from the video, please, and consider subscribing. Thank you for your time. Oh, I hear my wife calling. I gotta go.